Victorian England, 1847. The ancient, mournful stones of Everhart Manor seemed to weep with the perpetually overcast skies that spring. Amidst the overgrown, once vibrant roses, Lady Seraphina Everhart sat on a crumbling stone bench, a well-worn book of verse resting in her lap, her golden hair catching the muted afternoon light. At 20, she had grown accustomed to solitude, finding solace in the quiet defiance of reading in the neglected gardens. "Seraphina, what are you doing outside, where anyone might see you?" The sharp voice, familiar in its chill, cut through the garden's tranquility. Countess Isolde Blackwood approached with hurried, stiff steps, her fashionable walking dress rustling dramatically against the gravel path. Seraphina closed her book and rose. "Stepmother, I was merely reading. The doctor suggested fresh air would help with your supposed headaches." Isolde's lips formed a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "How convenient that you suddenly feel well enough to sit outside precisely when we are expecting visitors. Lord Huntington and his son are coming to discuss business matters. You will remain in your chambers as usual. We'll say you're indisposed. We wouldn't want you wandering about and startling our guests." Seraphina had heard these words countless times. "As you wish, stepmother." She gathered her book and shawl, heading towards the east wing, her designated prison. Inside the manor, 18-year-old Lady Elara Blackwood sat at her dressing table while her lady's maid, Annalise, arranged her dark curls. Unlike her mother, Elara harbored genuine affection for her half-sister. "Is mother sending Seraphina away again?" she asked, watching Annalise's reflection. "I'm afraid so, Miss Elara," the maid replied softly. "The Countess has given strict instructions." Elara sighed. "It's terribly unfair. Seraphina is the kindest soul in this house, yet mother treats her as though she were a scandal waiting to happen. She parades me before every eligible bachelor while keeping my sister locked away. All for what? A better match for me." Later that evening, Countess Isolde Blackwood stood alone in her opulent sitting room, admiring her reflection in a gilded mirror. Her fashionable gown, rich silk, clung perfectly to her figure. Her gaze drifted to a small, worn photograph on her vanity. A younger Isolde in simple, faded cotton, her eyes wide with a fear that still occasionally haunted her dreams. Memories of her impoverished youth, of cold garrets and constant struggle, flickered. She had clawed her way out, married Earl Alaric, endured his lingering affection for his first wife and daughter, and now she would never return to that abyss. Seraphina's inheritance, Elara's advantageous match, these were not mere desires, but necessities. Survival. The following afternoon, Isolde and Elara sat in the drawing room, awaiting their expected guests. Isolde smoothed imaginary wrinkles from her gown, a picture of practiced elegance. "Remember, Elara, Lord Silas is precisely the sort of gentleman we wish to cultivate. He is amiable, if not brilliantly clever, and his family's fortune is substantial." Just then, the butler, Mr. Davies, entered, his usually stoic expression giving way to visible surprise. "Your ladyship," he announced with a formal bow, "Duke Gideon Ravenscroft has arrived and requests an audience." Isolde nearly dropped her teacup, her porcelain skin blanching. "The Duke? Here? Now?" Isolde quickly composed herself, forcing a smile. "Show his grace in immediately, Mr. Davies." Elara watched her mother, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Duke Gideon Ravenscroft, at 32, was indeed the most eligible bachelor in England. Tall and commanding, with raven black hair and penetrating gray eyes, he carried himself with an innate authority. He entered, followed by Lord Huntington and his son, Lord Silas Huntington, a younger man with earnest, kind eyes, but a less imposing presence than the Duke. "Countess Blackwood." Gideon greeted with a formal bow. "Miss Blackwood, I apologize for the unexpected nature of my visit." Isolde practically glowed. "Your Grace, what a delightful surprise. We are honored by your presence. Please, do join us for tea." As the Duke took his seat, his gaze swept around the elegantly appointed drawing room. I was passing through the area on my way to my country estate and thought I might pay my respects. I understand Everhart Manor has exceptional gardens. My late mother was quite fond of horticulture." Isolde's smile widened. "The gardens are Everhart's pride, Your Grace. Perhaps Elara could show you around. She has quite the eye for botanical beauty." However, Gideon's gaze had already drifted towards the window overlooking the east garden, where, despite Isolde's instructions, Seraphina had returned to her reading spot, visible from this particular angle. Elara's eyes followed his. "Mother?" Elara interjected, feigning innocence. "Didn't you say the east garden was being replanted? Perhaps we should show His Grace the rose garden instead." Isolde's fixed smile faltered as her eyes darted to the window, her face paling when she spotted Seraphina. Before Isolde could redirect the conversation, the Duke spoke, his voice calm but insistent. "Who is that young lady in the garden? I don't believe we've been introduced." The silence that followed was deafening. Isolde's mind raced. "That's my stepdaughter, Lady Seraphina Everhart," she stammered, recovering slightly. "From my husband's first marriage. She's rarely seen in society due to her delicate health." Lord Silas, who had been quietly observing Seraphina from the window, spoke up. "She appears to be enjoying Shakespeare, Your Grace. Hardly the activity of an invalid. Her absorption is quite admirable." Gideon's expression remained unreadable, but his interest was unmistakable. "Indeed, she appears remarkably well for one so delicate, Countess." "Oh, she has good days and bad," Isolde explained hastily, her voice strained. "Today must be particularly good. Then I insist on making her acquaintance while she's feeling well," the Duke stated, rising from his seat. "After all, it would be remiss of me to visit Everhart and not meet all members of the family." With those words, the carefully constructed barriers Isolde had built around Seraphina began to crumble. As Gideon walked towards the garden, Elara caught her mother's murderous glare and suppressed a smile behind her teacup. The game had only just begun. Duke Gideon Ravenscroft strode across the manicured lawn with purpose, leaving a flustered Countess Isolde and an amused Elara in his wake. Years of navigating treacherous diplomatic waters had honed his instincts for deception, and something about the Countess's behavior had triggered those senses acutely. Seraphina remained unaware of his approach, completely absorbed in her reading. A gentle breeze carried the scent of roses and disturbed a golden strand of her hair, which she absently tucked behind her ear. It was this unguarded, natural gesture that caught the Duke's attention, so unlike the calculated movements of society ladies. "Shakespeare's sonnets," he remarked, stopping a respectful distance away. "An excellent choice for a spring afternoon." Startled, Seraphina looked up, her eyes widening. She quickly rose, nearly dropping her book. "Your Grace." She curtsied deeply, recognizing him instantly. "Forgive me, I wasn't aware we had visitors." "The fault is entirely mine, Lady Seraphina. I arrived unannounced, and then compounded my rudeness by interrupting your reading." He bowed slightly. "Gideon Ravenscroft, Duke of Ravenscroft, at your service." "It's an honor, Your Grace, though I fear I'm not properly dressed." "On the contrary, I find your appearance perfectly suitable for enjoying literature in one's own garden." His eyes held a glimmer of amusement. "May I ask which sonnet has captured your attention today?" Seraphina hesitated. "Sonnet 116, Your Grace. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds." He continued the verse, his deep voice giving the words new dimension, or bends with the remover to remove. Her surprise at his knowledge was evident, and he smiled. "Cambridge education. Some things remain with us, despite our best efforts to forget the tedium of study." "I hardly find Shakespeare tedious, Your Grace." "Nor do I, Lady Seraphina. It was the professor's droning interpretations that tested one's endurance." Inside the manor, Isolde watched through the drawing-room window with mounting horror. "This cannot be happening," she muttered, clutching her handkerchief so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Years of careful planning, undone in moments." "Mother, you look positively ill," Elara observed with mock concern. Perhaps you should sit down." "How can I sit when your half-sister is out there monopolizing the Duke's attention in that plain dress with her hair barely arranged?" Isolde paced frantically. "We must interrupt them. Send a servant with refreshments." "That would hardly be proper, mother," Elara replied, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Besides, Seraphina looks rather charming in her simplicity, doesn't she? So natural and unaffected." Isolde shot her daughter a suspicious glance. "You've never shown such enthusiasm for your sister's social prospects before." In the garden, Gideon gestured to the stone bench. "May I join you?" "I've developed a particular interest in gardens since inheriting my estate." Seraphina offered a small, genuine smile. "Of course, Your Grace." Just then, Lord Silas Huntington approached, a polite smile on his face. "Lady Seraphina." "Your Grace, I trust I am not interrupting?" "Not at all, Lord Silas," Gideon replied smoothly. "Lady Seraphina was just enlightening me on Sonnet 116. Silas turned to Seraphina, his expression earnest. "Indeed, a most profound choice. Do you find that love is truly so unwavering?" Seraphina, while responding politely to Silas's query, subtly directed her more animated and detailed explanation of the sonnet's philosophical depth towards Gideon, her eyes seeking his understanding. Gideon leaned slightly closer, his presence subtly asserting itself, a silent acknowledgment of their shared intellectual connection. Silas, noticing the unspoken current between them, a flicker of disappointment crossed his features before he regained his polite composure. "Perhaps I've grown tired of watching her hidden away like some family secret," Elara replied to her mother, her expression suddenly serious. "Father would never have allowed it." The mention of her late husband, Earl Elaric, silenced Isolde temporarily. Earl Elaric had doted on both his daughters equally, a fact Isolde had resented from the beginning of their marriage. His first wife, Seraphina's mother, had been a woman of quiet grace, an immense personal fortune, a fortune Alaric had ensured would pass directly to Seraphina. Isolde, whose own family had little to offer beyond a fading title, had always felt eclipsed, a second choice. After his death, restoring what she considered the natural order and securing Seraphina's considerable inheritance for herself and Elara had been almost too easy. In the garden, Seraphina found herself engaged in the most stimulating conversation she'd had in years. The Duke was not only knowledgeable about literature, but possessed a dry wit that frequently drew genuine laughter from her lips. "Lady Seraphina, forgive my directness, but I must confess my surprise," Gideon said after they had discussed everything from Shakespeare to the botanical merits of different rose varieties. "I've attended countless London seasons, yet I cannot recall ever making your acquaintance." A shadow crossed her features. "I haven't participated in recent seasons, Your Grace. My health has been somewhat unpredictable." "Indeed, you appear remarkably well at present." His gray eyes studied her with unconcealed interest. "Good days and bad, as my stepmother says," Seraphina replied carefully, aware that explaining further might appear as criticism of her family. "I see." The Duke's tone suggested he saw far more than she had explicitly stated. "And your good days coincide precisely with the absence of social invitations, I presume." Seraphina looked away, uncomfortable with the accuracy of his assessment. The Duke sensed her discomfort and changed tactics. "Forgive me, I've developed an unfortunate habit of speaking my mind. A diplomatic disaster, my advisors frequently remind me." "There's nothing to forgive, Your Grace. Directness can be refreshing." She offered a small smile, appreciating his perception while maintaining her dignity. Their conversation was eventually interrupted by the arrival of a servant, announcing that tea would be served on the terrace. The Duke offered his arm to escort Seraphina, an act that would not go unnoticed by the watching Countess. As they walked toward the terrace, Gideon lowered his voice. "Lady Seraphina, would you permit me to call on you properly tomorrow? I find myself with business in the area that may delay my journey home." Seraphina's heart fluttered treacherously. "Aye, that would be lovely, Your Grace, though I suspect my stepmother might have other plans." "Excellent. Then I shall be sure to mention it in front of the Countess." His smile held a conspiratorial edge that both thrilled and alarmed her. What followed was a masterclass in social maneuvering. Upon reaching the terrace, the Duke loudly proclaimed his delight at discovering Lady Seraphina's excellent taste in literature, and announced his intention to call again the following afternoon, specifically to loan her several volumes from his private library. Isolde's expression cycled through shock, dismay, and finally forced pleasure with such rapidity that Elara had to disguise her laughter as a coughing fit. The Countess found herself trapped in an impossible position, unable to refuse the Duke's request, without appearing unconscionably rude, yet furious at the prospect of Seraphina receiving such distinguished attention. Lord Silas, observing the Duke's deliberate moves and Seraphina's quiet, pleased demeanor, let out a subtle sigh, a clear acknowledgment of his own dwindling prospects. "How thoughtful of you, Your Grace," Isolde managed through clenched teeth. "Though I fear Seraphina's health is quite unpredictable. Perhaps Elara could—" "I insist, Countess," the Duke interrupted smoothly. "Lady Seraphina has impressed me with her literary knowledge, and I rarely encounter such genuine appreciation for the classics. It would be my pleasure to foster such commendable intellectual pursuits." When the Duke finally took his leave, the atmosphere at Everhart Manor turned glacial. Isolde waited only until his carriage had disappeared down the long drive before turning on her stepdaughter. "What did you say to him?" she demanded, her voice trembling with barely controlled rage. "What scheme have you concocted?" "None, stepmother," Seraphina answered honestly. "His Grace approached me in the garden. I could hardly refuse to speak with him. I needed fresh air. The doctor said—" "I care nothing for what the doctor said," Isolde snapped. "You deliberately placed yourself in the Duke's path knowing he was visiting today." "Mother," Elara interjected, "Seraphina couldn't have known. You told her Lord Huntington was coming, not the Duke." Isolde whirled on her daughter. "You stay out of this, Elara." "I've worked too hard, sacrificed too much to see everything ruined now." "Ruined?" Seraphina echoed, confusion evident in her voice. "Surely having the Duke of Ravenscroft call on our family brings honor to Everhart, regardless of which of us he speaks with." For a moment, Isolde seemed on the verge of revealing more than she intended. She composed herself with visible effort. "You know nothing of society or its expectations. The Duke's interest is merely a passing curiosity. Nothing more." Later that evening, in Isolde's private sitting room, Elara, emboldened by the day's events, tried once more. "Mother, Seraphina is not meant to be hidden away. Father would never have countenanced such cruelty. She deserves to be seen, to live a full life." Isolde's eyes hardened. "You speak of cruelty. I speak of practicality. Seraphina's place is not in society. There are reasons. Reasons you cannot comprehend, Elara. Reasons that protect our family's standing." Isolde's tone was cold, dismissive. "Your sister is a complication I have managed for years. You will do well to remember that. Now leave me. I have much to consider." Elara left, frustrated but now more determined than ever. Her mother's grip was unyielding, but Elara knew, deep down, that she could not stand by any longer. Seraphina, meanwhile, had retreated to her chambers. The brief joy of the afternoon, the stimulating conversation with Duke Gideon, now felt like a fragile dream shattered by the harsh reality of her stepmother's fury. She lowered her eyes, the familiar weight of isolation settling over her once more. The dream of freedom, of truly being seen, seemed distant, almost unattainable. She sat by the window, looking out at the darkened gardens, a ghost in her own home, the hope flickering, threatening to extinguish completely. As Seraphina sat by her window, her gaze idly drifted to the shelf where she kept a few treasured books. Reaching for a volume of ancient Greek myths, her hand brushed against a loose panel in the wall, hidden behind a heavy tapestry. Curiosity piqued. She pressed gently, and the panel gave way with a faint creak, revealing a small, dusty, secret passage. It was narrow, dark, and smelled of forgotten things. A relic of the manor's past, perhaps for servants or illicit lovers. A spark of intrigue ignited within her. If this passage connected to other parts of the house, it could be more than just an old secret. It could be a means of covert movement, a lifeline. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Elara slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. "Seraphina, are you awake?" "Elara, what are you doing here so late?" Seraphina set aside her book and moved to light an additional candle. "I've come with a confession and a proposition," Elara said, settling onto the window seat. "First, I must tell you that I've been a terrible sister, allowing Mother to treat you so shabbily all these years." "You've always been kind to me," Seraphina protested. "Kind, perhaps, but not brave." Elara's expression was determined. "That changes now. Tomorrow you will meet with the Duke regardless of what Mother says." "But how? She's already ordered me to feign illness." A mischievous smile spread across Elara's face. "Leave that to me. Mother has arranged to meet with the vicar in the village tomorrow afternoon. Something about charitable contributions to appear more pious before society. She'll be gone for at least 2 hours. She'll have the servants watching me. Most of them are more loyal to Father's memory and to you than to Mother. Haven't you noticed how they conveniently forget to report your garden excursions?" Seraphina considered this revelation. "Even if I do meet with the Duke tomorrow, what then? One afternoon changes nothing. Once he returns to London, everything will revert to how it was." "Perhaps." Elara took her half-sister's hands. "Or perhaps not. The Duke seemed genuinely taken with you, Seraphina. In all the seasons I've observed him, I've never seen him show such interest in anyone. Promise me you'll at least try. For Father's sake, if not your own." After a long moment, Seraphina nodded. "Very well, for Father." What neither sister knew was that in his carriage, returning to the local inn, Duke Gideon Ravenscroft was penning a letter to his most trusted friend, his solicitor in London. His instincts, honed by years of navigating treacherous political landscapes, screamed that something was deeply amiss at Everhart Manor. Isolde's frantic excuses, Seraphina's quiet resignation, the strange tale of unpredictable health, coinciding precisely with social engagements, it all formed a pattern. "Investigate the late Earl Alaric's will," he wrote, his quill scratching furiously across the parchment, "and the current financial state of Everhart Manor. I suspect irregularities." Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Ravenscroft, had never been a man to ignore his instincts, and they were telling him that Lady Seraphina was in grave danger. The following morning dawned bright and clear, as if the heavens themselves approved of the day's coming events. Seraphina woke early, her mind cycling between hope and trepidation. By the time her lady's maid, Mora, arrived with breakfast, she had already changed her mind a dozen times about whether to proceed with Elara's plan. "Good morning, my lady." Mora greeted her with a knowing smile. "Miss Elara asked me to help prepare you for your visitor today." Seraphina looked up in surprise. "She told you?" "Indeed, my lady, and I must say, it's about time someone stood up to the Countess." Mora set down the breakfast tray and moved to open the wardrobe. "We have much to do if you're to be ready when the Duke arrives." Mora briefly stepped out to fetch fresh water, leaving Seraphina alone. Her gaze fell upon the secret panel she had discovered the previous evening. A sudden thought struck her. Her mother had kept many secrets. What if... She pushed the panel open again, revealing the dusty passage. This time, she noticed a small, intricately carved wooden box tucked into a niche. Her heart pounding, Seraphina retrieved it. Inside, beneath a layer of faded velvet, lay a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age. Her mother's diary. She opened it to a random entry, her eyes scanning the delicate script. Alaric worries for Seraphina's future. Isolde's resentment grows daily, her eyes always on the ledger. My poor girl, may you never know the depths of such ambition. A sense of foreboding settled over Seraphina. This was more than just social maneuvering. It was something darker. The sound of Mora's footsteps returning pulled her back to the present. Quickly, Seraphina closed the diary and tucked it beneath her mattress, its secrets now a silent, unsettling companion. "Eleanor, you didn't." "I most certainly did, with help from Mrs. Bennet in the laundry. The Countess may rule above stairs, but below stairs, your father's memory and your kind heart command far more loyalty." Mora laid out a gown reverently. It was made of blue silk, exquisitely embroidered with lace trim, a gown that had belonged to Seraphina's late mother, hidden away for years from Isolde's destructive grasp. "Your mother wore this the night she first danced with your father. It seems appropriate for today." Tears pricked Seraphina's eyes. "I had no idea you all felt this way." "We have watched you fade like a flower without sunlight, my lady. Not one of us below stairs has approved of your treatment." Mora's expression grew serious. "Now eat your breakfast. We have much to do if you're to be ready when the Duke arrives." The morning hours at Everhart Manor were typically a symphony of quiet order. But today, a different tune was being played. Orchestrated by Lady Elara Blackwood, she entered the blue drawing room where her mother, Countess Isolde, was making a final inspection for the day's visitors. "Mother, have you seen the state of this room?" Elara asked, her voice laced with mock concern. "The curtains are positively limp, and surely someone has arranged these hideous dried flowers on the mantel. They're quite past their prime." Isolde, who had been meticulously adjusting a porcelain figurine, whirled around with alarm. "Impossible!" "I gave explicit instructions for this room to be perfect for Lord Huntington and his son." She rose immediately, her fashionable walking dress rustling, and began to scrutinize the drapes. Then, the mantel, where Elara had subtly rearranged the floral display to appear disheveled. "Show me at once! This is an outrage!" Elara fought to suppress a smirk. Her mother, now thoroughly diverted, launched into a frenzy of replanning and redecorating, consuming the precious morning hours that might otherwise have been spent monitoring Seraphina. By noon, Countess Isolde, flushed but finally satisfied with the drawing room's preparations, announced, "Now I must change for my meeting with the vicar. When the Duke arrives, make my excuses. Express my deepest regrets that an urgent charitable matter called me away." She paused, adjusting her hat with an air of absolute certainty. "Inform His Grace that you will entertain him until my return. As for Seraphina, I've already instructed Mr. Davies to inform His Grace that Lady Seraphina is indisposed and confined to her bed." Her lips formed a tight, self-satisfied smile. "He'll soon forget this passing fancy when presented with your superior charms and accomplishments, Elara. Seraphina is not meant for society." Elara nodded obediently, her expression neutral, though a spark of defiance flickered in her eyes. "As you say, Mother," she replied, fighting to keep her voice even. The manor seemed to exhale collectively once Isolde's carriage pulled away, a subtle current of anticipation flowing through its ancient halls. In her chambers, far from the bustling preparations, Lady Seraphina barely recognized her reflection. Mora, her lady's maid, stepped back with a proud smile, her work complete. Seraphina's golden hair, usually left in a simple braid, had been arranged in an elegant style that framed her delicate features perfectly, secured with her late mother's pearl combs. The blue silk gown, updated slightly to suit current fashion while preserving its original beauty, transformed her from the shadow she had become into the lady she was born to be. "There, my lady," Mora said, her voice soft with admiration. "A true earl's daughter, just as your mother was." Seraphina reached up, touching the soft silk, then the cool pearls, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and a fragile, nascent hope. She was no longer a ghost in her own home. She was a woman poised on the precipice of a new, uncertain future. A soft, urgent knock announced Elara's arrival. She slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind her, and stopped in her tracks, momentarily speechless. "Seraphina," she finally whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "You look magnificent." Seraphina's cheeks flushed. "Is it too much?" "Perhaps a simpler gown would." "It's perfect," Elara insisted, crossing the room to take her sister's hands. "You look exactly as you should have been allowed to look all these years." A sudden commotion from below stairs, the unmistakable sound of a carriage arriving, interrupted them. "He's here," Elara said, her eyes bright with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Are you ready?" Seraphina took a deep, steadying breath, her gaze meeting her sister's. "As ready as I'll ever be." Elara squeezed her hands. "Remember, Mother won't return for at least 2 hours. Mr. Davies knows to show the Duke to the garden terrace rather than the drawing room. I've arranged everything. Now go. Your Duke awaits." "He is hardly my Duke," Seraphina protested, but couldn't suppress a small, hopeful smile. Duke Gideon Ravenscroft had arrived at Everhart Manor precisely at the appointed hour, several leather-bound volumes tucked beneath his arm. He'd been mildly surprised, though his expression remained carefully neutral, when Mr. Davies, the butler, informed him that both the Countess and Lady Seraphina were unavailable, the former due to pressing charitable obligations, the latter supposedly bedridden with nervous exhaustion. "How unfortunate," Gideon had remarked, a subtle glint in his penetrating gray eyes. "And Miss Elara?" Mr. Davies, a man of impeccable decorum who had received specific, whispered instructions from Lady Elara earlier, replied with perfect gravity. "Miss Elara suggests that perhaps your Grace might enjoy refreshment on the garden terrace while awaiting her company." The Duke didn't miss the subtle emphasis on suggests rather than requests. The garden terrace would be most agreeable. Gideon concurred, a flicker of amusement in his gaze, already suspecting there was far more at play than initially apparent. He followed the butler, his curiosity piqued. Gideon had been seated on the garden terrace for only a few minutes, admiring the view of the rose garden, when the soft rustle of silk and approaching footsteps drew his attention. He rose, expecting to see Elara, but instead found himself momentarily speechless at the vision before him. Lady Seraphina Everhart, far from being bedridden, stood framed in the terrace doorway, utterly transformed. The simple girl from the garden had blossomed into an undeniable beauty, her blue silk gown complementing her eyes and fair coloring to perfection. Her golden hair, styled elegantly, caught the afternoon light. "Lady Seraphina," he finally said, recovering his composure, a genuine pleasure warming his voice. "I was informed you were unwell today." A faint blush colored her cheeks, but her voice held a new, quiet confidence. "A misunderstanding, Your Grace. I find myself in excellent health this afternoon." Gideon's corner of his mouth lifted in amusement. "Miraculous," he commented dryly. "Shall we attribute your recovery to divine intervention, or merely to the temporary absence of the Countess?" Seraphina's eyes widened, and then, to his delight, she laughed, a genuine musical sound that seemed to chase away the lingering gloom of the manor. "You are remarkably direct, Your Grace," Seraphina said, her laughter still echoing softly. "Arthur," he corrected, stepping forward to offer his arm. "When conspiring against overbearing stepmothers, I believe first names are more appropriate, don't you think?" She hesitated only briefly, a thrill running through her at the intimacy of his suggestion, before placing her hand on his offered arm. "Seraphina, then," she replied, the name feeling strangely right on her lips, "though I'm not certain. Conspiring is quite the right word." "No?" Arthur guided her to the stone bench where they'd sat the day before, maintaining a proper distance, while still creating an atmosphere of intimacy. "What, then, would you call this delightful subterfuge that has managed to resurrect you from your sickbed and conveniently coincide with your stepmother's absence?" A faint smile played on her lips. "A temporary rebellion," she admitted, her gaze warm, "orchestrated largely by my sister Elara." Arthur nodded, a glint of approval in his eyes. "I must confess, Miss Elara has risen considerably in my esteem." "I brought the books I promised," Arthur said, indicating the volumes he had placed on a nearby table. "First editions of Byron, Keats, and Mrs. Shelley's Frankenstein, though the latter may be too macabre for your taste." "On the contrary," Seraphina replied, her eyes lighting up as she carefully examined the volumes. "I find Mrs. Shelley's exploration of creation and responsibility fascinating, if somewhat disturbing." "A lady who appreciates both Shakespeare and Gothic literature," Arthur murmured, leaning slightly closer. "You grow more intriguing by the moment, Seraphina." Their conversation flowed effortlessly from literature to philosophy to art and music. Arthur found himself increasingly captivated, not just by her beauty, which was considerable, but by her mind. Despite years of isolation, Seraphina had educated herself through her father's extensive, hidden library, developing opinions that were both thoughtful and refreshingly free from society's usual constraints. "You must think me terribly provincial," she said, after expressing a particularly unconventional view on women's education. "I've had few opportunities to test my ideas in proper company. Provincial? Quite the opposite," Arthur countered, his gaze intense. "Do you know what I find at most London gatherings, Seraphina? Carefully rehearsed opinions, repeated verbatim from whatever publication is currently fashionable. Your thoughts are your own. That makes them infinitely more valuable." Their tete-a-tete might have continued indefinitely had Elara not appeared at the edge of the terrace, slightly breathless with urgent news. "Seraphina, Mother's carriage has been spotted on the road. She'll be here within 15 minutes. Elara nodded respectfully to the Duke. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption." Arthur rose immediately, his expression shifting to one of keen understanding. "No forgiveness necessary, Miss Elara. I appreciate your vigilance." He turned to Seraphina, who had paled slightly at the news. "I believe this is where our temporary rebellion must end, for today at least." Seraphina rose from her seat, a shadow crossing her features. "Yes," she agreed. "I should return to my chambers before she arrives." The urgency in Elara's voice, and the swiftness with which their precious time together had vanished, brought a familiar weight of apprehension back to Seraphina's heart. "Seraphina!" Arthur said, his tone serious, a protective instinct stirring within him. "It's been my reality for 3 years, Your Grace. One pleasant afternoon doesn't change that." He took her hand, his expression unwavering. "Doesn't it? What if I told you I have no intention of allowing you to disappear again? That I find myself inexplicably determined to see you properly introduced to society, to see you shine as you were meant to?" Seraphina stared at him, her heart fluttering treacherously, caught between the sudden surge of hope and the crushing weight of her stepmother's power. 12 minutes, Seraphina." Elara's voice cut in, a frantic whisper from the edge of the terrace. "Go," Arthur said, releasing her hand with a gentle squeeze. "But no, this isn't the end. I'll call again tomorrow, and the Countess will receive me. And you, Seraphina, will be present, illness notwithstanding." As Seraphina hurried back towards the east wing, her mind whirling with emotions she scarcely dared name, the Duke turned to Elara. "Miss Elara, I believe you and I should have a conversation about your sister's situation," Arthur began, his gaze sharp. "There's more happening here than a stepmother's jealousy, isn't there?" Elara hesitated, loyalty to her family warring with her growing concern for Seraphina. "Your Grace, I have resources and influence that could help her," Arthur pressed, his voice firm but not unkind. "But I need to understand what we're truly facing." After a moment's deliberation, Elara nodded. "Very well, Your Grace, but not here. Mother has eyes and ears everywhere." Arthur's eyes held a conspiratorial glint. "My carriage is at the front. Suggest a short drive to show me the local countryside, entirely proper with your groom's escort. We can speak freely there." As they settled into the Duke's carriage, Elara, carefully at first, began to hint at her mother's elaborate schemes, the convenient timing of Seraphina's illnesses, and the questionable management of the Everhart estate's finances. By the time Countess Isolde's carriage returned from her meeting with the vicar, the Duke's grander carriage was just returning from its brief excursion with Elara. The Countess, initially furious to find the Duke still at Everhart in her absence, was somewhat appeased to discover he had spent his time with her daughter rather than her stepdaughter. "Your Grace," she greeted him with practiced charm, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her fashionable walking dress. "How kind of you to entertain Elara in my absence. I hope she hasn't exhausted you with her chatter. On the contrary, Countess, Miss Elara has been most enlightening company." There was something in his tone, a subtle, almost imperceptible edge that made Isolde's fixed smile falter momentarily. "In fact, our conversation has convinced me to extend my stay in the area. I find Everhart and its surroundings quite fascinating." "How wonderful!" Isolde replied, though her eyes had narrowed slightly, a flicker of suspicion replacing her relief. "You must join us for dinner tomorrow evening, Your Grace," Isolde continued, quickly regaining her composure. "A small gathering, just family, of course." "I would be delighted," the Duke accepted smoothly, "and I insist that Lady Seraphina join us. I've brought several books that might interest her, and her absence today was most disappointing." Isolde's smile became fixed, a mask of forced pleasantry. "I'll see if her health permits, Your Grace. As you know, her constitution is quite delicate." "I have every confidence it will, Countess." His gray eyes held hers steadily, an unmistakable challenge in their depths. "In fact, I would consider it a personal favor if you would ensure she's well enough to attend." Isolde, for all her scheming, was not fool enough to directly refuse a duke's request. "Of course, Your Grace," she managed through clenched teeth. "Family means everything to me. Seraphina's welfare has always been my primary concern." Gideon's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel beneath the surface. "Has it indeed? How commendable! Then we are aligned in our interests, for her welfare has become a matter of great importance to me as well." After the Duke had departed, Isolde's composure rapidly unraveled. Countess Isolde waited only until Gideon's carriage had disappeared down the long drive before summoning Elara to her private sitting room, her voice trembling with barely controlled rage. "What did you tell him?" she demanded the moment the door closed behind her daughter. "During your drive, what exactly did you discuss?" "Everhart's history, the local landmarks." Elara answered carefully, maintaining an innocent expression. "He seemed quite interested in father's family lineage." Isolde's face paled. "His family? What specifically did he ask?" "Nothing unusual, Mother, just polite conversation." Elara maintained her facade. "Why are you so concerned?" "Perhaps he's simply interested in Seraphina. She is, after all, quite beautiful and accomplished when given the chance to—" "Enough!" Isolde snapped, pacing the room like a caged animal. "The Duke doesn't extend his visits or take country drives with young ladies for polite conversation. He's investigating us, investigating me. I can sense it." Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Tomorrow, you will occupy the Duke's attention entirely. Wear your best gown. Display every accomplishment. Charm him completely, and Seraphina will develop a fever by afternoon. The Duke may insist, but even he cannot argue with the physician's diagnosis." "You would go so far as to bring in Dr. Finch to lie?" Elara had asked, genuinely shocked. Isolde merely dismissed her with a wave of her hand. Later that evening, Countess Isolde summoned Dr. Finch to her private sitting room. The physician looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Countess, I cannot simply declare the girl ill without examining her," he protested, wiping perspiration from his brow. "It would be unethical and potentially dangerous if she truly needed medical attention in the future." "Don't speak to me of ethics, Doctor," Isolde hissed, her voice glacial. "You've been well compensated for your discretion these past years. One more day is all I require." "The situation has changed, I assure you." Dr. Finch insisted. "The Duke of Ravenscroft is involved now. If he suspects, He suspects nothing!" Isolde interrupted, her voice rising in desperation. "He's merely bored with country living and amusing himself with my stepdaughter's novelty. Once he returns to London, everything will continue as before. Now, will you provide the medical certification I require for tomorrow, or shall I find another physician who understands his role more clearly?" After a long, agonizing moment, Dr. Finch nodded reluctantly. "Very well, Countess, one final time." What Countess Isolde and Dr. Finch didn't know was that at that very moment, in a private room at the local inn, Duke Gideon Ravenscroft was receiving a special messenger from London. The man delivered a packet of documents, copies of the late Earl Alaric's will, financial records of Everhart Manor, and other legal papers. Gideon read through them by lamplight, his expression growing increasingly grave. The Earl's will was explicit. Everhart Manor and half the estate's income were to pass directly to Lady Seraphina upon her 21st birthday, a date now less than 2 months away. The Countess and Elara were to receive the London townhouse and the remaining income, a generous provision, but far less than what Isolde currently controlled as Seraphina's guardian. "So that's the game," Arthur murmured, setting down the documents, his jaw tightening. It was never about jealousy alone. It was about money and power. By keeping Seraphina isolated and reportedly in poor health, Isolde had maintained complete control over the estate. If she could secure a marriage between Elara and a wealthy nobleman before Seraphina came of age, her position would be secure regardless. But if Seraphina were to make an advantageous match herself, particularly with someone of sufficient status to question the management of her inheritance, Isolde's carefully constructed empire would crumble. Arthur's jaw tightened further as he considered Seraphina's situation. 3 years of systematic exclusion from society had effectively prevented her from meeting eligible gentlemen before her inheritance came due. It was clever, calculated, and utterly despicable. He sent a quick note to his solicitor in London, requesting additional legal counsel on the matter, then turned his attention to the more immediate concern: tomorrow's dinner at Everhart Manor. If his suspicions were correct, the Countess would go to extraordinary lengths to prevent Seraphina from attending. Meanwhile, at Everhart, Seraphina was indeed being prepared for another illness. Dr. Finch had arrived late in the evening at Isolde's summons and was currently in her private sitting room, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "The situation has become untenable," Isolde informed the physician, her voice glacial. "We must accelerate our plans. Lady Seraphina will experience a severe decline tonight. Severe enough to justify immediate removal to a private facility for treatment." Dr. Finch blanched. "Countess, I cannot possibly certify." "You can, and you will," Isolde interrupted, her eyes hard. "Unless you wish your own professional improprieties to become public knowledge. I haven't forgotten your treatment of the baker's daughter last winter, Doctor." The physician's shoulders sagged in defeat. "When would you have her moved?" "Dawn tomorrow. I've already written to the Pines' retreat in Northland. They're expecting her arrival within the week." Neither of them noticed the slightly ajar door, nor the wide-eyed maid, Mora, who had been delivering fresh linens and overheard the entire chilling exchange. Mora silently retreated down the corridor, her heart pounding with the weight of what she'd discovered. In her chambers, Seraphina sat at her dressing table, carefully returning her mother's pearl combs to their velvet case. The day's events had awakened feelings she'd long suppressed: hope, joy, and something more complex when she thought of the Duke. His promise to return, his determination to include her in tomorrow's dinner. These were dangerous thoughts that could lead only to disappointment. Her gaze drifted to the loose panel in the wall, the secret passage she had discovered just last night. A faint thrill ran through her. She mused on its hidden potential, a relic of the manor's past. It might connect to the servants, passages, or perhaps even a rarely used exit. A spark of cunning lit her eyes. If she was to be kept prisoner, perhaps the manor itself held the key to her freedom, a silent ally in stone. She mentally mapped out possible routes, a desperate strategy forming in her mind. A soft knock interrupted her melancholy reflections. Mora entered, her face ashen. "My lady," she whispered urgently, closing the door and checking the connecting rooms to ensure they were alone. "I've just overheard something terrible, the Countess. She means to have you declared ill again tomorrow. But that's not all." As Mora, trembling, relayed the chilling conversation between Isolde and Dr. Finch, Seraphina's expression shifted from disbelief to horror. "A sanitarium?" she echoed faintly, her voice barely a whisper. "She would go that far?" "There's more, my lady. Your father's will. You're to inherit Everhart and half the estate's income on your 21st birthday. The Countess has been keeping this from you all these years." Seraphina sank back into her chair, memories suddenly realigning in her mind. Her father's quiet assurances before his death that she would always be secure. Isolde's increasing hostility afterward. The systematic isolation that began precisely when the mourning period ended. "What am I to do?" she whispered, her voice laced with terror. "If she's willing to fabricate illnesses now, What might she attempt as my birthday approaches? Mora clasped her hands, her eyes bright with fierce loyalty. You must tell the Duke, my lady. He has the power and influence to protect you. I barely know him, Seraphina protested, a fresh wave of fear washing over her. Why would he involve himself in our family's affairs? Begging your pardon, my lady, but I've seen how he looks at you, and he's already suspicious. Why else would he insist on your presence tomorrow? Mora straightened with determination. If you won't tell him, then I shall. I promised your father on his deathbed that I would look after you, and I'll not stand by while the Countess plots to lock you away. No, Seraphina decided after a moment's thought, a new resolve hardening her features. I'll speak to him myself, but I'll need your help, Mora, and Elara's, if I'm to be ill tomorrow. We'll need to find another way for me to communicate with the Duke. As the two women began formulating their plan, the pieces of a complex chess match were being positioned across the board. By morning, the game would begin in earnest, with Seraphina's future hanging in the balance. Elara sat at her elegant writing desk, quill poised over a fresh sheet of parchment, but no words came. Her conversation with Duke Gideon earlier that day, the quiet intensity in his gray eyes, had stirred something deep within her. She recalled her mother's escalating cruelty towards Seraphina, the casual dismissal of her sister's very existence. Her previous attempt at a direct confrontation had been met with a wall of cold indifference, reinforcing the chilling truth that subtle hints were no longer enough. Loyalty to her mother, a fading obligation, warred with a burgeoning sense of moral outrage. A furrow appeared on her brow. No, not enough. Not nearly enough. She would not stand by as Seraphina was swallowed by the shadows of Everhart Manor. Her hand trembled, then steeled itself. This note would be direct. It had to be. A sharp rap on the door startled Elara, forcing her to quickly fold the half-written note and tuck it beneath a heavy book. Countess Isolde swept into the room, her fashionable evening gown rustling, a tight smile on her lips. Elara, dear, still up? I trust you are considering your attire for tomorrow. The Duke will be present, and one must always present one's best. Your sapphire blue, perhaps? It brings out your eyes wonderfully. Isolde settled onto the edge of the bed, her gaze fixed on her daughter. As for Seraphina, it is most unfortunate, but Dr. Finch has confirmed her delicate constitution requires complete rest. She will, of course, be indisposed. The Duke will soon forget this passing fancy when presented with your superior charms and accomplishments. Elara maintained a neutral expression, a passive nod, her only response, but beneath her calm exterior, a fierce resolve hardened. She truly believes this. Once Isolde had departed, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Elara retrieved the sealed note from its hiding place. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of urgency. She rang for her maid, Sarah, who appeared almost instantly. "Sarah, I need this delivered immediately." Elara pressed the note into the maid's hand. "To the Rose and Crown Inn, for the Duke Gideon Ravenscroft's hands only." Sarah's eyes widened. "Miss, if your mother discovers—" "She won't," Elara interrupted, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Use Finn, the kitchen boy. He's quick and discreet. Tell him there's a crown in it for his trouble. This cannot fail, Sarah." The maid, sensing the gravity of the situation, nodded, her apprehension giving way to determined loyalty. "At once, Miss Elara." As Sarah slipped out, Elara knew the next day's chess match had already begun. The first pale light of dawn had barely touched Everhart Manor when Dr. Finch arrived in Lady Seraphina's chambers. He performed a cursory examination, his eyes avoiding hers, his movements stiff with discomfort. "I'm sorry, my dear," he murmured, packing away his instruments. "Nervous exhaustion, I'm afraid. Complete bed rest is prescribed, perhaps in a few days." Seraphina lay still, her composure unwavering, though a bitter taste filled her mouth. "Thank you for your concern, Doctor," she replied, her voice even. "Though I feel perfectly well this morning." Dr. Finch flinched, shame evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Yes, well, these conditions can be deceptive. Best to be cautious." He hurried from the room, leaving behind the lingering scent of antiseptic and the heavy silence of a lie. Shortly after Dr. Finch's hasty departure, Mora, Seraphina's maid, entered with a breakfast tray. Her knowing smile spoke volumes. "It's as we expected, my lady. The Countess is already informing the servants that you're too ill for visitors, even His Grace." Seraphina nodded, her expression grim. "Then we proceed as planned." Mora placed the tray on the bedside table, then discreetly slipped a folded note from beneath a napkin. "Miss Elara sent this. She says the Duke received her message last night and has responded accordingly." Seraphina's fingers trembled as she unfolded the elegant script. "Dearest B, all is arranged. The Duke will arrive at precisely 2 o'clock. Mother plans to receive him in the blue drawing room, while I will be practicing the pianoforte in the music room as instructed. Mora knows where to position you for our plan to succeed. Have courage. You are not alone in this battle. With love and determination, E." A renewed resolve settled over Seraphina. She was not alone. Across the manor, Countess Isolde was issuing final instructions to the housekeeper regarding the evening's dinner arrangements, her voice sharp with anticipation. Suddenly, Mr. Davies, the butler, appeared, his usually stoic expression giving way to a visible furrow of concern. "Your ladyship," he announced with a formal bow, "Mr. William Harrison has arrived from London. He says he represents Harrington and Sons, solicitors at law, and wishes to speak with you on a matter of great urgency regarding the late Earl's estate." Isolde's perfect composure fractured. "A solicitor? Now?" "We are expecting the Duke at 2 o'clock, she snapped, her voice tight. "The gentleman insists it cannot wait, your ladyship. He mentioned something about irregularities in the estate's financial records that require immediate attention." The color drained from Isolde's face. Financial irregularities, her creative accounting of Seraphina's inheritance. "Show him to the library," she managed, gripping the back of a nearby chair for support. "I'll attend him shortly." By 2 o'clock, Countess Isolde found herself thoroughly trapped in the library with Mr. Harrison. The solicitor, a man of quiet but unyielding persistence, had produced an alarming array of ledgers and documents, each requiring explanation. "I understand your social obligations, Countess," Mr. Harrison stated calmly, adjusting his spectacles. "However, these discrepancies in Lady Seraphina's trust must be addressed before her 21st birthday. The penalties for misappropriation of awards funds are quite severe." Isolde's increasingly desperate attempts to conclude the meeting were met with polite but firm insistence that these matters could not be delayed. Her mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel. This unexpected development threatened to derail her carefully orchestrated plans for the Duke's visit, and, more concerning still, was the mention of financial irregularities. Had her creative accounting of Seraphina's inheritance been discovered? She was cornered, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under the solicitor's relentless, quiet pressure. In the entrance hall, Duke Gideon Ravenscroft was admitted, with all the ceremony befitting his rank. He carried several leather-bound volumes, as promised. When informed by Mr. Davies that the Countess was unavoidably detained with legal matters, Gideon expressed perfect understanding, a subtle amusement playing at the corner of his lips. "In that case, I should like to pay my respects to Miss Elara," he requested. "I believe she mentioned practicing her music this afternoon." Mr. Davies, who had received specific instructions from both Elara and Mora, bowed. "Indeed, Your Grace. If you would follow me, I believe Miss Elara is in the music room." He led the Duke down a particular corridor, one that passed directly beneath a small balcony, connecting the family's private quarters to the main gallery. His pace, unhurried, yet deliberate. As they approached this precise location, a soft voice called from above. "Your Grace!" Arthur looked up. There, on the small balcony, stood Seraphina. She was dressed not as an invalid, but in a simple yet elegant day dress of pale green, her golden hair arranged with care, framing a face devoid of illness. "Lady Seraphina," Gideon greeted her, genuine pleasure warming his voice. "I was informed you were confined to your bed with nervous exhaustion, yet you appear remarkably composed for one so afflicted." A hint of irony touched her lips. "A miraculous recovery, Your Grace, though I fear my stepmother and Dr. Finch would disagree with that assessment." Gideon's eyes held hers, a smile playing at his mouth. He turned to the butler. "Mr. Davies, would you be so kind as to inform Miss Elara that I'll join her shortly? Lady Seraphina and I have matters to discuss." Mr. Davies bowed, a subtle knowing glance exchanged between him and Gideon before retreating. Once they were alone, Gideon gestured to the small sitting area beneath the balcony. "Can you come down, or am I to conduct this conversation with Juliet on her balcony?" Seraphina offered a small, rueful smile. "Alas, my chambers are being watched, Your Grace. This balcony is as far as I dare venture." Her gaze grew urgent. "But we haven't much time. The Countess will eventually extricate herself from her unexpected legal visitor." Gideon's smile held a hint of satisfaction. "Not as unexpected as she believes. Mr. Harrison works for my solicitor and will keep the Countess occupied for precisely as long as we require." Seraphina's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise and dawning understanding crossing her features. The audacity of his planning. It was both thrilling and alarming. Gideon's expression grew serious, his gaze unwavering. "Beatrice, I know about your inheritance. I know what your stepmother has been doing and what she plans." Seraphina's breath hitched. Relief, fear, and a profound sense of vulnerability washed over her. "Then you know why I needed to speak with you," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Last night, my maid, Mora, overheard the Countess discussing plans to place me in a sanitarium once Elara is safely betrothed, to prevent me from claiming my inheritance when I turned 21. Gideon's face darkened with anger, his jaw tightening. "That confirms my worst suspicions. This goes beyond mere social manipulation. It's criminal." A shared moment of grim understanding passed between them, the weight of Isolde's treachery hanging heavy in the air. "What can be done?" Seraphina whispered, her voice laced with desperation. "She is my guardian until my birthday." Gideon's voice was firm, resolute. "A guardian who has systematically isolated you, mismanaged your inheritance, and now plots to have you institutionalized. No court would uphold her authority once these facts are known, Seraphina. Her actions are not merely unethical, they are criminal." A faint noise from further down the corridor caught their attention, a muffled cough, then the soft scuff of shoes. Someone was coming. Urgency, sharp and cold, pierced the fragile bubble of their conversation. "Listen carefully," Gideon said quickly, his voice low and precise, his intense gaze fixed on Seraphina. "Tomorrow morning at dawn, be ready. Pack only what you can carry discreetly. Your maid, Mora, can she be trusted with your life?" Seraphina nodded, her heart pounding. "Good. Have her meet my carriage at the east gate at first light. I'll have you removed to my aunt's house in London for protection until legal proceedings can transfer your guardianship." Seraphina stared at him, overwhelmed. "You would do this for me?" she asked, emotion making her voice unsteady, barely audible above the distant footsteps. "I barely know you." Gideon's expression softened, but his resolve remained steel. "I would do far more, Seraphina," Gideon replied, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race, a blush rising to her cheeks. It was more than protection, more than duty. It was a promise, unspoken yet clear, of feelings far deeper than mere acquaintance. His words, his gaze, stirred a perilous hope within her, a longing she had not dared to acknowledge. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, closer, shattering the intimate moment. "Go!" Seraphina urged, her voice a frantic whisper, her eyes darting towards the corner. "Well, speak tomorrow." With a last meaningful glance, a silent promise hanging between them, Gideon turned and continued down the corridor toward the music room, arriving just as the servant rounded the opposite corner, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. Seraphina slipped back through the balcony doors to her chambers, her mind reeling with equal parts fear and hope. The remainder of the day passed in a fog of anticipation and dread. Dinner that evening was a masterclass in social tension. Countess Isolde, having finally been released from her legal emergency, received Duke Gideon with effusive apologies and elaborate explanations. Arthur accepted them with aristocratic grace that revealed nothing of his true thoughts. "I was most disappointed not to see Lady Seraphina," he commented casually as the first course was served, his gaze briefly meeting Elara's across the table. "Dr. Finch believes her condition is serious." Isolde offered a smooth, practiced smile. "Nervous exhaustion, Your Grace. The excitement of recent days has proven too much for her delicate constitution. The doctor insists on complete rest and seclusion." Gideon's eyebrows arched imperceptibly. "How concerning. Perhaps I might recommend my own physician. Dr. Hartley has had remarkable success with similar cases among the ladies of my acquaintance." "You're too kind, Your Grace," Isolde replied, her voice tightening almost imperceptibly. "But I wouldn't dream of imposing. Dr. Finch has attended our family for years and understands Seraphina's unique medical history." Elara watched their verbal sparring with barely concealed fascination, a silent observer of the dangerous game. Lord Silas Huntingdon, present at dinner with his father, leaned slightly towards Elara. "Miss Elara, I hope Lady Seraphina is recovering well. I was quite impressed by her intellectual pursuits yesterday. It is rare to find such depth of thought." His concern seemed genuine, a stark contrast to Isolde's machinations. Isolde, however, observed the exchange with a calculating glance. "Lord Silas is a respectable match, though not a duke. Still, if Seraphina were to marry him, and I could retain control over his influence and her inheritance," a fleeting thought, quickly dismissed, as her gaze returned to Gideon. Throughout the meal, Gideon maintained the perfect facade of a concerned acquaintance, yet his words carried subtle barbs. He casually mentioned his extensive legal connections in London and his particular interest in estate management discrepancies that sometimes arose after a gentleman's passing. Isolde grew visibly strained, her forced smile becoming increasingly fixed. She realized Gideon was more than just a passing acquaintance. He was a formidable opponent, and he knew far more than he let on. Elara caught her mother's desperate, darting eyes and suppressed a knowing smile behind her napkin. By the time Gideon took his leave, promising to call again the following afternoon, Isolde was visibly strained, her carefully constructed composure on the verge of unraveling. As soon as the front door closed behind Gideon, Isolde ordered a brandy brought to her private sitting room and summoned Dr. Finch once more. Her composure had rapidly unraveled, leaving behind a desperate, ruthless woman. "The situation has become untenable," she informed the physician when he arrived, her voice glacial. "We must accelerate our plans. Lady Seraphina will experience a severe decline tonight, severe enough to justify immediate removal to a private facility for treatment." Dr. Finch blanched. "Countess, I cannot possibly certify." "You can, and you will," Isolde interrupted, her eyes cold as steel. "Unless you wish your own professional improprieties to become public knowledge. I haven't forgotten your treatment of the baker's daughter last winter, Doctor." The physician's shoulders sagged in defeat. "When would you have her moved?" "Dawn tomorrow. I've already written to the Pines Retreat in Northumberland. They're expecting her arrival within the week." She held up a letter, a chilling testament to her resolve. Neither of them was aware that Mora, once again positioned outside the door, ostensibly delivering fresh linens, had heard every word. The maid slipped away silently, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and fierce determination. Her destination was not Seraphina's chambers, but Elara's, where she burst in, breathless and ashen-faced. "Miss Elara," she whispered urgently, closing the door quietly behind her. "I've just overheard something terrible. The Countess. She means to remove Lady Seraphina to an asylum by dawn tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight." Elara's eyes widened in horror. They had hours, mere hours, to save Seraphina. Approaching midnight, Lady Seraphina Everhart moved through her chambers with practiced quiet. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows, deepening the sense of clandestine activity. She knelt before a small leather valise, her hands moving with a purpose born of both anxiety and determination. First, her late mother's miniature portrait, a tiny oval of serene beauty, which she tucked into an inner pocket. Then, her father's heavy signet ring, a solid gold circle that felt cold against her thumb before she slipped it onto a chain hidden beneath her simple traveling gown. A few cherished books, worn copies of poetry and philosophy, followed, her silent companions through years of isolation. These are not just objects, she thought, her fingers tracing the worn spines. They are echoes of who I was, and promises of who I might yet become. A link to the past, and a hope for a future not yet written. Practical necessities like a spare shawl and a small purse of coins completed the sparse packing. This small collection was all that remained of her old life, and all she would carry into her new one. Just before midnight, Mora, Seraphina's loyal maid, moved like a wisp of smoke through the servants' passages near the east gate. In her arms, carefully concealed beneath a dark cloak, was Seraphina's packed valise. She found Finn, the young kitchen boy, huddled in a shadowy alcove, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Finn," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant rumble of thunder that had just begun to stir the night. "The valise. You know what to do." Finn nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he took the bag. "To the east gate, before dawn. Hide it well amongst the bushes. The Duke's carriage is unmarked, remember. And for your discretion, there will be a sovereign waiting for you in the morning. From Lady Seraphina herself." Finn clutched the valise tightly to his chest. "Aye, Mora, for Lady Seraphina, and for the Earl's memory. No one will see me." With a final, shared glance of conspiratorial resolve, Finn melted back into the deeper shadows, the valise now positioned for its perilous journey. Midnight chimed from the grandfather clock in the main hall, its mournful tones barely reaching Seraphina's isolated chambers. A soft knock, then the door creaked open and Elara slipped inside, closing it quietly behind her. The sisters met in a tight embrace, a silent acknowledgement of the peril that hung over them, and the courage that now bound them. "Dearest Bee," Elara whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "are you ready?" Seraphina nodded, her eyes shining. "As I'll ever be. And you, Elara, are you certain?" Elara pulled a small, sealed packet from her gown. "These are for Father's old friends, to his solicitor, even to our maternal grandfather in Yorkshire. Once you are safely away, I will dispatch them. They will ensure Mother's actions become known to those who can intervene legally." Seraphina's brow furrowed with concern. "But the danger to you, Elara, when she discovers my absence?" Elara's smile held a mischievous glint, but her eyes were resolute. "Let her rage. I have been complicit for too long. Besides, she can hardly lock away her only remaining pawn in the marriage market, can she?" "I'll send for you as soon as it's safe," Seraphina promised, holding her sister's hands. "I know you will," Elara replied, squeezing them fiercely before she quietly departed, leaving Seraphina alone with her thoughts and a packet of letters that held the key to their future. Seraphina lay fully clothed upon her bed, the valise hidden beneath it, the packet of letters tucked safely into her bodice. Sleep, a luxury she could not afford, eluded her. Her mind, a whirlwind of fear and cautious hope, raced through the night. 3 days ago, her world had been a gilded cage, small and predictable. Now, everything was uncertain. She thought of Gideon, his piercing gray eyes, his dry wit, his unwavering resolve. He had spoken of love, a concept so foreign to her confined existence. Yet his words had resonated with a profound truth. He had seen her, truly seen her, not as an invalid or a burden, but as an intelligent, resilient woman. This was more than kindness, more than chivalry. This was a man willing to risk his reputation, his influence, for her freedom. A new dawn, indeed, she mused, as the black velvet of the sky began to soften to a bruised purple, promising the arrival of day. A new life, a new destiny, perhaps even a duchess's destiny, awaited her beyond these walls. The pre-dawn quiet, already disturbed by Seraphina's anxious thoughts, was suddenly shattered by a violent clap of thunder that seemed to shake Everhart Manor to its very foundations. Rain, heavy and relentless, lashed against the ancient stone walls, drumming against the window panes like a furious accusation. Lightning, sharp and stark, ripped through the inky sky, momentarily illuminating the manor's Gothic silhouette against a chaotic backdrop of swirling clouds. The storm raged, a wild, elemental force mirroring the turmoil within Seraphina's heart, externalizing the internal drama of her desperate flight. It was a harbinger, both of danger and of the cleansing, liberating change she so desperately sought. Mora slipped into Seraphina's chambers, her face ashen, her eyes wide with terror. The storm raged outside, its fury echoing her hushed words. "My lady, we must go now," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "The Countess. She's ordered the carriage prepared for 6 o'clock. They mean to remove you to an asylum in Northumberland today, not next week as originally planned." Seraphina, already dressed in her simplest traveling gown, rose immediately, her heart pounding. The news, though expected, still struck with a physical blow. The storm outside seemed to rage in sync with her internal turmoil, a frantic drumbeat urging her onward. "Has Finn taken the valise?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Yes, my lady, and the Duke's carriage awaits at the east gate, but we must hurry. The house is already stirring, and the Countess will be up shortly." Moving with practiced stealth, Seraphina and Mora slipped into the network of servants, passages, dark and dusty arteries that snaked through the ancient manor. The distant rumble of thunder and the relentless drumming of rain provided a cacophony that muffled their soft footsteps. They navigated the labyrinthine corridors, Mora's intimate knowledge of every hidden turn and rarely used staircase proving invaluable. As they neared the main kitchen, the clatter of a coal scuttle echoed from around a corner. "Quickly, my lady!" Mora whispered, pulling Seraphina into a narrow, rarely used linen closet. They pressed themselves against the rough shelves, holding their breath as a young hallboy passed by, whistling a jaunty tune, completely oblivious to the two figures concealed mere feet away. The storm outside, though terrifying, was a blessing, its fury providing a veil for their desperate flight through the manor's secret past. As they neared the side door leading to the east gardens, Mora suddenly pulled Seraphina back into a deep alcove. From around the corner, Dr. Finch's weary voice drifted, accompanied by Countess Isolde's chillingly calm tones. "You're certain the sedative will keep her compliant for the journey?" Isolde was asking. "Yes, Countess. She'll be confused and docile, unable to cause any disruption or make herself understood to strangers." Dr. Finch sounded defeated, his discomfort palpable even from a distance. "Your discomfort is noted, Doctor, and entirely irrelevant," Isolde replied, her voice glacial. "The carriage will be ready in an hour. Prepare the draft, and administer it immediately." Seraphina's heart pounded with horrifying clarity. "They're coming for me," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. A flash of lightning illuminated her terrified face, a stark realization of the immediate, physical threat. Isolde and Dr. Finch's footsteps began to recede, heading directly towards Seraphina's chambers, sealing their race against time. "They'll discover I'm gone within minutes," Seraphina whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. The realization spurred her, a cold dread replacing her lingering fear. "Then we have no more time to waste," Mora replied, her hand firm on Seraphina's arm. With a final desperate surge, she pulled Seraphina through the side door and into the stormy gardens. The pre-dawn air was raw, laden with the scent of wet earth and bruised roses. A light mist, thick with rain, hovered above the dew-drenched grass, offering a fragile, fleeting cloak for their escape. They kept to the deepest shadows of the hedges, their simple gowns quickly saturated, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they dashed towards the east gate, urged onward by the desperate race against discovery. At last, through the swirling mist and driving rain, the faint outline of the east gate appeared, and there, as promised, was Gideon's unmarked carriage, its dark silhouette a beacon of hope. A trusted groom held the horses steady, their breath pluming in the cold air. Beside them, Finn, the kitchen boy, stood nervously, clutching Seraphina's valise. "My lady," he whispered, relief washing over his young face as they approached. "I was afraid you wouldn't come." "Thank you, Finn," Seraphina breathed, pressing a small silver thimble into his hand. Her mother's, one of the few precious valuables she'd been able to bring. "For your courage." The boy clutched it tightly, his eyes shining. "Godspeed, my lady. Miss Elara said to tell you she's ready on her end." Mora quickly helped Seraphina into the carriage, her movements swift and efficient. But then, at the door, she hesitated. "My lady, I should return to your chambers," she said, her voice grimly determined. "Replace your pillows with something that might, at a quick glance, appear to be you sleeping. It may buy a few extra minutes." "That's too dangerous, Mora," Seraphina protested, her heart clenching at the thought of her maid facing Isolde's fury. "If you're discovered, then I'll have the satisfaction of telling the Countess exactly what I think of her schemes," Mora replied with a flash of grim humor, her eyes resolute. "Go, my lady. The Duke awaits you at the coaching inn 3 miles down the road. I'll follow when I can." With a final fierce embrace, Mora disappeared back towards the house, a selfless act of loyalty that underscored the profound devotion Seraphina's father had inspired in the Thornfield staff, a loyalty that now extended to his daughter in her hour of greatest need. The carriage pulled away from the east gate, moving slowly at first, its wheels crunching softly on the gravel, then accelerating once they reached the main road. Seraphina sat rigidly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the receding darkness. She expected, at any moment, to hear shouts of pursuit, the thundering hooves of horses, but the countryside remained eerily peaceful. The storm, though still grumbling in the distance, had begun to subside, and the early hour meant only a few early-rising farmers, and the occasional milk cart shared the road. "I have fled my home," she thought, the enormity of her actions washing over her, my guardian, everything familiar. "I have placed my trust in a man I barely know." Her world, once suffocatingly small, was now vast and terrifyingly uncertain. At the coaching inn 3 miles down the road, Arthur, Duke Gideon Ravenscroft, waited, pacing with barely contained tension. The storm had begun to lift, leaving the sky a bruised purple, but his anxiety remained. When Seraphina's unmarked carriage finally arrived, he moved forward immediately, opening the door himself rather than waiting for the groom. "Thank God," he breathed, helping her down, his hand firm and reassuring on her arm. "When you didn't arrive at the arranged time, I feared the worst." "We discovered they planned to move me this morning. Not next week," Seraphina explained, her voice still trembling slightly as he led her quickly to his own grander private carriage. "The Countess will know I'm gone by now." "Then we'll waste no time," Arthur replied, handing her into his carriage, following immediately after, and signaling to his driver. "My aunt's house in London is prepared for your arrival. You'll be safe there until the legal proceedings are complete." As the carriage lurched forward, leaving the coaching inn behind, Seraphina found herself suddenly overwhelmed. The adrenaline of the escape began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of disorientation. "Not second thoughts," she answered honestly, her gaze fixed on the passing countryside, "but I confess to feeling adrift. 3 days ago, my world was small but known. Now everything is uncertain." Arthur, observing her distress, spoke gently. "Except for one thing," he replied, his gray eyes holding hers steadily. "You are no longer alone in this fight." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet conviction, steadied her more than any elaborate reassurances could have. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." They traveled in companionable silence for some time, the rhythmic motion of the carriage, and the early hour eventually lulling Seraphina into a light doze, the Duke's reassuring presence a balm to her troubled soul. They stopped to change horses at a bustling posting house, the scent of hay and damp leather filling the air. A servant brought refreshments to the carriage. "We've made excellent time," Arthur informed her, handing her a steaming cup of tea. "No sign of pursuit. I expect your stepmother is still searching Everhart's grounds, assuming you couldn't have gone far without assistance." Seraphina accepted the tea gratefully, its warmth a comfort against the lingering chill of the dawn. Elara will keep her occupied as long as possible, she said, a faint smile touching her lips. She plans to send letters to Father's old friends and associates once my absence is discovered. As they resumed their journey, Seraphina continued. Letters detailing the Countess's treatment of me these past years and her blatant disregard for Father's wishes. Arthur nodded approvingly. Your sister has shown remarkable courage. I admit I misjudged her initially, assuming she was cut from the same cloth as her mother. I should have known better. Seraphina's expression softened with affection for her sister. Elara has always been kind to me, though perhaps not brave enough to openly defy the Countess until now. She was as much a victim of her mother's ambitions as I was, merely in a different way. Gideon's glance held a new understanding, a deepening respect for the bonds of family and the quiet strength of the Everhart sisters. Arthur broached the subject that had been uppermost in his mind since discovering the truth about Seraphina's situation. Once we reach London, my solicitors will petition the courts for an emergency removal of your guardianship from the Countess, he explained. Given the evidence of financial mismanagement and the extreme measures she was prepared to take regarding your person, I'm confident the petition will succeed. Until your birthday, you'll need a new guardian for those remaining weeks. My aunt, Lady Catherine Spencer, has agreed to serve in that capacity. She's a formidable woman of impeccable reputation. His mouth quirked in a half-smile. No one would dare question her fitness as a guardian, not even the Countess. Seraphina nodded, absorbing the practicalities, but then a new concern surfaced. There is another matter we must discuss, one of considerable delicacy. He paused, his expression growing more serious. Your reputation, Lady Seraphina. While your escape was necessary, society will not look kindly on a young, unmarried woman traveling alone with a bachelor, regardless of the circumstances. By the time we reach London, rumors will already be circulating. Seraphina's brow furrowed. I hadn't considered that. Though given my non-existent social position these past years, perhaps there isn't much reputation to salvage. On the contrary, Arthur countered, his voice firm. As the Earl of Everhart's daughter and the heir to a considerable fortune, your standing in society should be assured. I will not be the instrument of its destruction. What do you suggest, then? Arthur took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for a momentous step. Under ordinary circumstances, I would never be so presumptuous, but our situation is far from ordinary. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle, yet, somehow, electrifying. Lady Seraphina Everhart, I am asking for your permission to pay my addresses to you, with the understanding that a formal betrothal would protect your reputation, while simultaneously placing you beyond your stepmother's reach permanently. Seraphina stared at him, momentarily speechless. Of all possible solutions, this was the one she had not anticipated. Your Grace, Arthur, he corrected softly. After everything, I believe we've earned the right to first names, don't you? Arthur, she amended, the name feeling strangely right on her lips. You cannot possibly be serious. We've known each other less than a week. And yet, he continued, his expression open and honest, in that time, I've learned more about your character than I have about women I've known for years. Your intelligence, your grace under pressure, your loyalty to those who care for you. These qualities are rare and precious. I find myself thinking of you constantly, wondering what observations you might make about a book I'm reading, or how you might enjoy the gardens at my estate. His words, so different from the practiced compliments she'd overheard gentlemen offer, touched something deep within her. Still, caution prevailed. You're offering marriage to protect me, she stated, trying to understand his motivation. It's incredibly generous, but... No, Arthur interrupted firmly. I'm offering courtship, the chance for us to know each other properly, as you deserve. The betrothal would be understood as a future promise, giving us time to determine if we suit. If after a reasonable period you find your feelings do not align with mine, I would release you from any obligation, though the protection of my name would remain. And your feelings? Seraphina asked quietly, hardly daring to meet his eyes. You speak of mine, but what of yours? Arthur's gaze never wavered. I believe I am falling in love with you, Seraphina Everhart. Not with your fortune or your connections, but with you, the woman who reads Shakespeare in gardens and stands firm against injustice with dignity rather than bitterness. I cannot promise that love will grow perfectly between us, but I can promise to cherish and respect you always, whether as husband or friend." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Seraphina felt tears threatening. 3 years of isolation, of being treated as invisible, and now this man, this Duke, saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. "I would be honored to receive your addresses," she said softly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I believe my feelings may be developing in a similar direction." The smile that transformed Arthur's face was like sunrise breaking through clouds. He raised her hand to his lips, the gesture formal yet filled with unspoken promise. "Then I shall speak with Lady Catherine immediately upon our arrival. As your temporary guardian, she must give her blessing, though I suspect she'll be more than amenable." The remainder of the journey passed in a curious mixture of comfortable conversation and charged silences, both of them acutely aware that their relationship had fundamentally shifted. By the time London's outskirts appeared on the horizon, Seraphina felt as though she had known Arthur Ravenscroft all her life, while simultaneously finding him more intriguing with each passing hour. Lady Catherine Spencer's townhouse in Belgrave Square was everything Everhart Manor was not: bright, elegant, and filled with a welcoming warmth that seemed to banish the chill of the London afternoon. As Gideon helped Seraphina from the carriage, she felt a profound sense of relief wash over her, like shedding a heavy cloak. The formidable Lady Catherine, a tall, silver-haired woman with piercing blue eyes, met them in the entrance hall. "So this is the young lady who has finally captured my nephew's interest," she declared, her voice firm but not unkind, as Gideon made the introductions. "Well, you certainly have more substance than the empty-headed debutantes usually paraded before him. That's promising." Seraphina managed a small, grateful smile, already warming to the older woman's directness. Lady Catherine, after a keen appraisal, immediately summoned a maid. "The blue suite is prepared, and I've engaged a suitable lady's maid. You'll be comfortable here, my dear. We shall make short work of this Countess Isolde." Seraphina felt a surge of hope, a sense of safety she hadn't known in years. In the days that followed, the quiet efficiency of Gideon's London solicitors was a stark contrast to the dramatic chaos of Everhart Manor. From his austere office, Duke Gideon Ravenscroft oversaw every detail, his expression grave but resolute. Mr. Harrison, his trusted solicitor, worked tirelessly, a whirlwind of parchment and legal precedent. Documents related to the late Earl Alaric Everhart's will, meticulously gathered financial records of the estate, and damning accounts of Countess Isolde's expenditures were all laid bare. The petition for Seraphina's guardianship removal was being drafted with meticulous care, each clause a hammer blow against Isolde's deceit. Gideon's resolve to see justice done for Seraphina hardened with every revelation, transforming his initial intrigue into a fierce determination. The legal machine had begun its inexorable grind, and there would be no stopping it. A few days later, a familiar face appeared at Lady Catherine's townhouse. Mora, Seraphina's loyal maid, arrived, her eyes bright with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. Seraphina rushed to embrace her, tears stinging her eyes. "Mora, you're safe!" Lady Catherine, intrigued, ordered tea. Once settled, Mora, still breathless, recounted the whirlwind at Everhart Manor. "The Countess was beside herself, my lady," raging through the house, accusing everyone of conspiracy. "When Miss Elara suggested that perhaps treating you more kindly might have prevented your flight, I thought her ladyship might actually strike her." Seraphina gasped, surprised and proud of Elara's newfound courage. Mora's eyes gleamed with the delicious scandal of it all, a small victory for the staff who had long suffered under Isolde's tyranny. "But that's not all, my lady," Mora continued, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Miss Elara, bless her heart, confronted Dr. Finch after you left. She reminded him of his oath as a physician, and how he had been coerced into falsifying your medical reports. He broke down completely, my lady, completely! Wrote out a full account of everything the Countess forced him to do, and then he fled. To his brother's home in Scotland, they say." Seraphina sat stunned, the implications washing over her. "Dr. Finch confessed?" she whispered. disbelief warring with a profound sense of relief. The weight of Isolde's lies, the terrifying pretense of her illness, had been lifted by the conscience of a man previously compromised. It was a pivotal turning point, providing undeniable evidence against her stepmother. And now, Mora announced, her voice filled with ill-concealed satisfaction, Miss Elara has been removed to Lord Pembroke's estate for her own protection. And the Countess, my lady, she's effectively under house arrest at Everhart Manor. Investigators are swarming the estate, examining the financial records. Her house of cards, as they say, has collapsed entirely. Seraphina felt a strange mix of satisfaction and melancholy. While she took no joy in Isolde's utter ruin, the thought of Elara finally being safe and free brought a genuine smile to her lips. She had worried deeply for her sister, and hearing of her security was a profound comfort. Justice, though slow, was finally taking its course. True to Mora's report and Gideon's relentless efforts, the legal proceedings moved with surprising swiftness. Arthur's influence, combined with Dr. Finch's damning written testimony and the extensive financial evidence uncovered by the investigators, left Countess Isolde with no defense. Within a week, the London courts officially removed her as Seraphina's guardian. Lady Catherine Spencer, with her impeccable reputation and formidable presence, was appointed in her place for the brief remaining period until Seraphina's 21st birthday. Seraphina signed the necessary documents with a quiet, dignified relief, the stroke of her pen severing the last legal ties to her stepmother's cruel authority. She was no longer a ward of Isolde Blackwood, but under the protection of a woman whose integrity was beyond question. Throughout this tumultuous time, Gideon called at Lady Catherine's townhouse daily. Initially, his visits were ostensibly to update Seraphina on legal developments, but increasingly they were simply an excuse to spend time in her company. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, ranging from the latest literary releases to ancient philosophy, from the intricacies of orchestral music to the wonders of botanical science. With each shared observation, each respectful disagreement, the connection between them deepened. Seraphina found herself blossoming under his attentive gaze, her mind stimulated, her spirit invigorated. Lady Catherine, a keen observer of human nature, watched their growing attachment with a subtle, approving smile, though she maintained a proper chaperone's vigilance during their interactions. One afternoon, as Seraphina worked on correspondence in the sunlit morning room, Lady Catherine paused her own needlework. "He's a changed man when he's with you," she commented, her piercing blue eyes fixed on Seraphina. "I've known Arthur since he was a boy, brilliant, but reserved, always keeping people at a distance. You've somehow breached those walls, my dear." Seraphina looked up, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. "He did the same for me, Lady Catherine," she replied softly, her voice filled with genuine emotion. "I had built my own defenses after years of my stepmother's cruelty, convinced that no one would ever truly see beyond the shadow she cast. Arthur saw through them immediately, and for that I am eternally grateful. Scene_end. SENE_start. Global scene number 94. "Then you're well matched," the older woman declared with satisfaction, a rare smile gracing her lips. "Though I insist on a proper courtship period, hasty marriages, even between well-suited individuals, can lead to unnecessary difficulties. And you, my dear, have had enough difficulties for a lifetime." Seraphina nodded in agreement. "Of course," she said, though secretly her heart swelled with a new, thrilling hope. In the quiet moments alone, she found herself dreaming of a future as Gideon's Duchess, imagining a life where her intellect was celebrated, her kindness cherished, and her presence an undeniable light. The formality of courtship was a small price to pay for such a magnificent destiny. A week after her arrival in London, another unexpected visitor was announced. "Lady Elara Blackwood, accompanied by Lord Pembroke, your ladyship," the butler proclaimed. Seraphina rose instantly, her heart leaping. Elara, looking radiant and unburdened, rushed into the drawing-room. The sisters embraced tearfully, both talking at once, a torrent of relief and joy. "Oh, Seraphina, I was so worried," Elara cried. "And I for you, my dear Elara." Seraphina replied, holding her sister tightly. Lady Catherine, observing the emotional flurry with amused exasperation, intervened. "Ladies, perhaps one at a time? I believe tea in the drawing-room would provide a more suitable environment for your reunion. Lord Pembroke, a pleasure." Once settled with tea, and Lord Pembroke having departed to meet with Gideon, the sisters finally had a moment of privacy. Elara, her eyes sparkling, shared the full, dramatic story of what had transpired at Everhart Manor after Seraphina's escape. "Mother initially believed you'd simply hidden somewhere on the grounds," she explained, her voice animated. "By the time she realized you were truly gone, I'd already dispatched my letters to Father's friends." Lord Pembroke arrived first, followed by Sir William Darcy and Judge Harrington, all demanding explanations. The manor was in an uproar, Seraphina, utter chaos. Seraphina listened, a mix of horror and admiration for her sister's courage filling her. "You were remarkably brave, Elara," she said, reaching for her sister's hand. "No, merely doing what I should have done years ago," Elara replied, her expression momentarily somber. "When Mother realized she was cornered, she became desperate. She tried to claim you had become mentally unstable, that you'd been behaving erratically and posed a danger to yourself." Seraphina gasped. "Hence, Dr. Finch's confession was so vital," she observed, remembering Mora's report. "Precisely," Elara confirmed. "I confronted him privately, reminded him of his oath as a physician. He broke down completely, Seraphina, completely. Wrote out a full account of how the Countess had manipulated him for years, and then he left Everhart immediately for his brother's home in Scotland. A rather dramatic exit, I must say." "And now?" Seraphina asked, concerned for her sister's welfare in the aftermath of such dramatic events. Elara's expression grew genuinely somber as she spoke of their mother's house of cards, collapsed entirely. "The investigators discovered she'd been systematically diverting funds from your inheritance to her personal accounts, and even falsifying reports to the trustees. She's facing criminal charges, Seraphina. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. The list seems to grow daily." Seraphina sat down her teacup, conflicting emotions washing over her. Despite everything, she took no pleasure in Isolde's downfall. "What will happen to her?" she whispered. "That remains uncertain," Elara replied. "But as for me," she continued, her face breaking into a radiant, unburdened smile Seraphina hadn't seen in years. "I feel free, Seraphina. For the first time, I'm not being molded into someone else's vision, or used as a pawn in someone else's game. Lord and Lady Pembroke have invited me to stay with them indefinitely. And Lady Pembroke has already begun introducing me to society on my own merits, not as the Countess's daughter." "I am so glad," Seraphina said sincerely, a warm glow spreading through her. "You deserve every happiness, Elara." "As do you," Elara replied, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Speaking of which, Lord Pembroke mentioned that a certain duke has been in constant attendance here. Is there something you wish to tell me?" Seraphina blushed, unable to contain her smile. "Arthur has been remarkable. He's asked permission to court me formally with Lady Catherine's blessing." Elara clapped her hands softly. "Court you? From what I've observed, he's halfway to the altar already. The way he looks at you, Seraphina, it's not merely kindness or chivalry. I've never seen such devotion in anyone, let alone the formidable Duke Gideon Ravenscroft." "It's still very new," Seraphina cautioned, though her heart leapt at her sister's words. "We're taking things slowly, getting to know one another properly, as Lady Catherine insists." "Very sensible," Elara agreed, though her tone suggested she thought it entirely unnecessary. "Though I predict you'll be a duchess before the year is out. Mark my words, Seraphina. Your quiet strength and brilliant mind were always destined for greatness, even if Mother tried to hide them away." Seraphina laughed, a genuine musical sound that filled the room. The bond with her sister, now fully restored and strengthened by their shared ordeal, was a treasure she would forever cherish. That evening, Lady Catherine hosted a small dinner party to celebrate the sisters' reunion and the successful resolution of the legal proceedings. The dining room, usually a bastion of quiet formality, buzzed with an atmosphere of warm camaraderie. Lord Pembroke and several other close friends of the late Earl Alaric were present, their faces radiating approval and relief. Seraphina, seated beside Gideon, felt a contentment she had not known since before her father's death. Laughter and stimulating conversation flowed freely, a stark contrast to the strained silence of Everhart Manor. She glanced across the table, catching Gideon's eye, and a shared, knowing smile passed between them, a silent acknowledgment of the path they had walked to reach this peaceful haven. After dinner, Arthur managed to draw Seraphina aside into the small conservatory adjoining the drawing room. The space was a lush oasis, filled with exotic plants and illuminated by strategically placed lanterns, casting a warm, golden glow across the verdant foliage. "You seem happy tonight," he observed, his eyes tracing her features as if committing them to memory. "I am," she confirmed. "Seeing Elara, knowing she's well and happy, it's lifted a weight I didn't realize I was still carrying. And the news about your stepmother, that doesn't trouble you?" Seraphina considered the question thoughtfully. "I take no joy in her downfall, if that's what you're asking. What she did was wrong, undeniably so, but I hope in time she might find some measure of peace and redemption. My father taught me that bitterness changes nothing, except the heart that carries it. Besides," she added with a faint smile, "I find I have too much happiness in my present circumstances to waste energy on past injustices." Arthur's expression softened with admiration. "Your capacity for forgiveness astounds me, Seraphina." "About those present circumstances," Arthur began, his tone shifting to something more serious. "There's something I wish to discuss with you." A flutter of anticipation rose in Seraphina's chest. "Your 21st birthday is next week. Once it arrives, you'll be legally independent, mistress of your own fortune and destiny." He moved slightly closer, his gaze intent. "I want you to know that nothing changes for me when that day comes. My feelings, my intentions, they remain constant." "I never thought otherwise," Seraphina assured him, her voice barely a whisper. "Nevertheless, it needs saying." Arthur took both her hands in his touch warm and steady. "I courted you, not out of duty or chivalry, Seraphina, but because you've become essential to my happiness." The simple declaration, delivered with such quiet certainty, brought tears to Seraphina's eyes. "And you to mine," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Arthur's smile in response was like sunrise breaking across his usually composed features. For a moment it seemed he might say more, perhaps even propose there and then, but the sound of approaching footsteps reminded them of their surroundings. Lady Catherine appeared at the conservatory entrance, her expression a masterful blend of propriety and amusement. "While I approve of your courtship, Arthur, perhaps the conservatory during a dinner party is not the most discreet location for private conversations." "My apologies, Aunt," Arthur replied, though his smile remained undimmed. "We were just discussing Seraphina's upcoming birthday celebrations." "Indeed?" Lady Catherine arched a silver eyebrow skeptically. "Well, continue that discussion in the drawing room, if you please. Lord Pembroke is asking for you." Seraphina felt a warm blush creep up her neck, but her heart was light. As they rejoined the party, Seraphina felt a contentment she had not known since before her father's death. Surrounded by people who valued her for herself, with her sister safe and her future bright with possibility, the dark years at Everhart Manor seemed increasingly distant. The chill of the ancient stones, the suffocating silence, the constant fear of Isolde's machinations, all faded into the background, a closed chapter in a story that was now taking a far happier turn. Gideon remained close by her side, his presence a comforting anchor. She looked at him, then at Elara, then at Lady Catherine, a profound sense of belonging settling over her. Her new life, truly her own, was just beginning. The week leading up to Lady Seraphina Everhart's 21st birthday passed in a whirlwind of activity, a vibrant contrast to the quiet solitude that had once defined her days. Lady Catherine, declaring that the occasion demanded proper recognition, had arranged a small but elegant birthday ball. Invitations, penned with meticulous care, were dispatched to a select circle of influential and discerning guests, those who would welcome the Earl of Everhart's daughter without prejudice or excessive curiosity about her unusual past. Elara, having moved temporarily to the townhouse for the celebrations, bustled with Seraphina and Lady Catherine, discussing guest lists and floral arrangements. Seraphina found herself smiling more freely than she ever had, a radiant glow illuminating her features amidst the joyful anticipation. Amidst the delightful chaos of preparations, Duke Gideon Ravenscroft still found opportunities for his daily visits. He would arrive, not with grand gestures, but with small, thoughtful tokens that spoke volumes of his growing affection and his keen understanding of Seraphina's heart. A rare volume of poetry she had mentioned admiring, a delicate pressed flower from his estate's conservatory, or simply engaging news about mutual acquaintances or cultural events that he knew would pique her intellectual curiosity. These quiet moments, tucked between fittings for gowns and discussions of ball menus, deepened the unspoken bond between them, a tender testament to a love built on shared interests and profound respect. On the morning of her 21st birthday, Seraphina woke to find her bedchamber filled with the sweet scent of fresh roses, her favorite flower, their petals still dewy. On her dressing table rested a small, exquisitely wrapped package. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, revealing an exquisite pearl pendant suspended from a delicate gold chain. Beside it lay a note, written in Gideon's distinctive, firm hand. "My dearest Seraphina," it read, "these pearls belong to my mother, who received them from my father on her 21st birthday. I can think of no worthier successor to wear them than you, whose quiet strength and inner beauty echo hers in so many ways. Happy birthday, my love. Today marks not only your legal independence, but the beginning of what I hope will be our shared future. With deepest affection, Gideon." Tears pricked Seraphina's eyes as she fastened the necklace, the pearls cool against her skin, a tangible symbol of belonging, of continuity, of a promise she scarcely dared believe. When Duke Gideon Ravenscroft arrived that evening, resplendent in formal attire, Seraphina felt her breath catch at the sight of him. Though she had always found him handsome, tonight there was something different in his bearing, a contained energy, an air of anticipation that mirrored her own emotions. Lady Catherine had insisted on ordering a new gown for the occasion, a creation of ivory silk embroidered with delicate gold thread and seed pearls that complemented Gideon's gift perfectly. Seraphina's golden hair was arranged in an elegant style, adorned with a single white rose, the overall effect both sophisticated and youthfully fresh. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his gray eyes taking in her appearance with undisguised admiration. "Thank you," she replied, finding herself uncharacteristically shy under his intense gaze. "And thank you for the necklace. It's the most precious gift I've ever received." "It suits you," he observed, his expression softening, "though its beauty pales in comparison to its wearer." The arrival of the first guests prevented further private conversation, but the warmth of his words settled in her heart. The ball proved a resounding success. Lady Catherine's careful selection of guests ensured Seraphina was welcomed warmly into society, without the uncomfortable scrutiny she had once feared. Several of her father's old friends attended, expressing delight at seeing the Earl's daughter flourishing after her difficult years. "Your father would be so proud," Lord Pembroke told her during a quiet moment between dances, his eyes kind. "Not just of your beauty or accomplishments, but of your character, the way you faced adversity with dignity and emerged stronger." "Thank you," Seraphina said, deeply moved. "That means more than I can express." The genuine affection and acceptance she received filled her with a profound sense of gratitude. As the evening progressed, Gideon claimed his dance with the birthday honoree, a waltz that had only recently become acceptable in the more progressive circles of society. The intimacy of the dance, with his hand at her waist, and their faces closer than propriety usually allowed, created a private world amid the crowded ballroom. "Are you enjoying your birthday celebration?" he asked, guiding her expertly through the turns. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," she admitted, her voice soft. "A few months ago I was hidden away at Everhart, convinced I would never experience an evening like this. And now I feel as though I'm living in a dream, one from which I hope never to wake. Something in her voice, the depth of emotion perhaps, caused Gideon's hand to tighten slightly at her waist. "There's something I wish to ask you," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the music. "Not here, with so many eyes upon us. Would you meet me in the garden in half an hour? Lady Catherine has installed new lanterns along the paths, entirely proper for guests to admire the blooms." Seraphina's heart quickened, a dizzying mix of anticipation and nerves swirling within her. She met his intense gaze, a silent question passing between them. "Yes," she agreed simply, her voice barely a whisper, but firm. The promise in his eyes was unmistakable, and her own reflected a hopeful surrender. The 30 minutes that followed seemed interminable. Seraphina fulfilled her duties as the evening's honoree, accepting congratulations, engaging in polite conversation, and feigning interest in the latest gossip, all while counting the seconds until she could slip away to the garden. Her mind raced with possibilities, both thrilling and terrifying. Was this the moment she had dreamed of, or merely another step in a courtship that, while cherished, remained uncertain? The blur of dancing guests and the hum of conversation faded into a distant din, as her focus narrowed to the impending rendezvous. Finally, during a lively country dance that occupied most of the guests, Seraphina made her way discreetly to the French doors leading to the garden terrace. As Gideon had mentioned, the paths were illuminated with delicate paper lanterns, casting a warm, golden glow across Lady Catherine's meticulously maintained formal gardens. She found him waiting beside the central fountain, his tall figure silhouetted against the cascading water. The soft splash of the fountain and the distant strains of music from the ballroom created a sense of intimate seclusion, despite their proximity to the house. As she approached, he turned, and the expression on his face made her heart skip a beat. "You came," he said, as though he had harbored some doubt. "Of course." She moved to stand beside him, the moment charged with unspoken emotion. Gideon took her hands in his gaze steady and intent. "Seraphina, when I first saw you in the gardens at Everhart, reading Shakespeare with such absorption, I was intrigued. When I spoke with you and discovered your mind and spirit, I was captivated. And when I learned of your circumstances and witnessed your courage in facing them, I was humbled." He paused, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "These past weeks of coming to know you properly have only confirmed what I suspected from the beginning, that you are the woman I've been waiting for all my life, though I didn't know it until I found you." Releasing one of her hands, Gideon reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Seraphina's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring, a perfect sapphire surrounded by diamonds set in platinum. "Lady Seraphina Everhart," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife? I promise to cherish, respect, and love you for all the days of our lives, to be your partner in every sense, and to ensure that the shadows of your past are thoroughly eclipsed by the brightness of our future together." Tears of joy blurred Seraphina's vision as she looked from the exquisite ring to the remarkable man holding it. "Yes," she whispered, her voice strengthening as she repeated, "Yes, Gideon, I will marry you." With a smile that transformed his usually reserved features, Gideon slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the sapphire catching the lantern light as if illuminated from within. "It matches your eyes," he murmured, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her fingers just above the ring. The gesture, so tender and reverent, broke the last of Seraphina's restraint. She stepped closer, her free hand coming to rest against his chest. "I love you," she said softly, the words she had held back now flowing freely. "I think I began loving you from our first conversation in the garden, when you saw me. Truly saw me, after years of being invisible." Gideon's arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer still. "My dearest, loveliest Seraphina," he murmured, his face now mere inches from hers. "May I kiss you? I've been wanting to since that moment in the garden." Her answer was to lift her face to his, and as their lips met in a first tender kiss, Seraphina felt the last pieces of her world fall perfectly into place. When they eventually returned to the ballroom, hand in hand, their radiant expressions made a formal announcement almost unnecessary. Lady Catherine, spotting the sapphire ring immediately, gave a satisfied nod before summoning the orchestra to silence for Gideon's official announcement. The guests responded with genuine enthusiasm, Lord Pembroke raising his glass in a heartfelt toast to the couple's health and happiness. Elara embraced her sister with tears of joy, whispering, "I told you so," in her ear with sisterly satisfaction. Seraphina's heart swelled with the warmth of their collective blessing, a testament to the community that had gathered around her. As the celebration continued around them, Gideon kept Seraphina close by his side, as if reluctant to be separated from her even for a moment. "Happy?" he asked softly during a brief lull in the well-wishes surrounding them. Seraphina looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a joy that went beyond mere happiness, a profound contentment, a sense of homecoming, of rightness. "Completely," she answered, her voice imbued with a quiet certainty. "It feels as though everything, even the difficult years, was leading to this moment, this life we'll build together." Gideon's hand tightened around hers, the pressure conveying understanding, agreement, and promise. 1 year later, the Duchess of Ravenscroft stood in the newly redesigned gardens of Ravenscroft House, the Duke's ancestral estate. Spring sunshine warmed her face as she surveyed the changes she had implemented since becoming mistress of the vast property. Changes that blended her own love of natural, informal beauty with the estate's grand traditions, transforming neglected corners into vibrant havens. Seraphina reflected on her growth, the blossoming of her confidence, and the profound happiness she had found in her new life, a life brimming with purpose and genuine connection. She was no longer a hidden flower, but a thriving, influential duchess. "Admiring your handiwork?" Gideon's voice came from behind her, followed by his arms encircling her waist. "Our handiwork," she corrected, leaning back against him contentedly. "I recall a certain duke insisting on personally selecting the varieties of roses for the eastern terrace." "A duke who knows when to defer to his duchess's superior taste in most matters," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The gardens have never looked more beautiful, like their mistress." Seraphina turned in his arms to face him, her expression softly radiant. "Flatterer," she teased playfully, "you've become quite the silver-tongued courtier since our marriage." "Not flattery when it's the simple truth," Gideon countered, his gaze tender as it traced her features. "Marriage to you has made me happier than I ever imagined possible, Seraphina. I find new reasons to be grateful for you every day." "As I do for you," she replied, reaching up to touch his cheek affectionately. Their first year of marriage had indeed been one of profound happiness and growth for both of them. Seraphina had blossomed as the Duchess of Ravenscroft, bringing warmth and thoughtfulness to a role that might have intimidated a less resilient woman. Gideon, meanwhile, had revealed depths of tenderness and humor that had surprised even those who had known him longest. Together they had established a household known for its genuine hospitality, intellectual vibrancy, and compassionate engagement with the communities surrounding their estates. Lady Catherine, a frequent visitor, often remarked that they had created precisely the kind of partnership her late brother, Gideon's father, had hoped his son would find. Their union was not merely a love match, but a partnership of purpose, enriching their lives and the lives of those within their sphere of influence. The echoes of past injustices had faded, replaced by the symphony of a harmonious present. "Shall we go in?" Gideon suggested, offering his arm. "Elara and Edward will be arriving soon, and I know you're eager to hear their news from Italy." Seraphina smiled at the mention of her sister and her husband. Elara had married Lord Edward Fitzwilliam, a kind and scholarly second son, 6 months earlier. Their shared passion for art and history had promptly led them to an extended honeymoon tour of Italy's cultural treasures. "I can hardly wait to see her," Seraphina agreed as they walked toward the house, "and I have my own news to share." She gave him a knowing look, her eyes sparkling with a secret joy. Gideon stopped, turning to her with sudden intensity. "News?" Seraphina's smile widened, her eyes shining with joyful anticipation. "Dr. Hartley confirmed it this morning. By winter, Ravenscroft House will have a new heir, or heiress. For a moment, Gideon seemed frozen in place, his expression cycling through shock, wonder, and finally, incandescent joy. Without warning, he lifted Seraphina off her feet in an exuberant embrace, propriety forgotten in the privacy of their blooming gardens. He spun her once, then held her close, his face buried in her hair. "Truly?" he asked when he finally set her down, his hands still cradling her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "We're to have a child?" "Truly," she confirmed, laughing at his uncharacteristic display of exuberance. "In approximately 6 months, according to the doctor." Gideon's hand moved to rest gently against her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. "A family of our own," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Seraphina, my love, you've made me the happiest of men." As they continued toward the house, arm in arm and hearts full of shared joy, their steps lightened by the incredible news. Seraphina reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a hidden flower at Everhart Manor to the beloved wife of a duke, soon to be mother to their child. The path had not been easy or direct. It had been fraught with isolation, manipulation, and moments of despair. Yet every step, even the painful ones, had led to this moment of perfect contentment. Inside Ravenscroft House, her home, their home, the future awaited, bright with promise and secure in love. She was no longer defined by her past, but by the boundless possibilities of her present and future. The end. Dear listener, when the final words of our story fade into silence, what remains is not just memory, but possibility. Seraphina found her liberation at 21, but perhaps the true freedom comes to us much later, in these precious years you now inhabit. Society rarely speaks this truth, that the 7th, 8th, and 9th decades of life can be the most authentic of all. You've shed the costumes you once wore to please others. The exhausting dance of impression management has finally ended. Like a tree that no longer needs to grow taller, you now expand in wisdom and deepen your roots. You know something the young cannot. That heartbreak doesn't end you. That fear can be faced. That laughter matters more than perfection. The Countess Isoldes of this world, those who judge by narrow standards of utility or appearance, have lost their power over you. What magnificent liberation! The Countess Isoldes of this world, those who judge by narrow standards of utility or appearance, have lost their power over you. What magnificent liberation! When sleep eludes you tonight, consider this revolutionary thought. You have earned the right to prioritize joy, not the fleeting pleasures chased in youth, but the profound contentment of a life fully acknowledged. Duke Gideon recognized Seraphina's worth instantly, because he had lived long enough to value substance over spectacle. You stand in this same place of discernment. Your body may whisper its complaints, yes, but it has carried you through storms and sunshine, deserving gratitude rather than criticism. The lines on your face aren't flaws. They're a map of a journey courageously undertaken, a testament to smiles offered and tears honestly shed. The world speaks constantly of beginnings, first steps, first loves, first homes. But there is unique beauty in culmination, in the gathering together of a lifetime's understanding. You hold this now, this precious harvest. What will you do with such bounty? Who might be nourished by what you alone can share? Tonight, as you drift toward dreams, know this. Your presence in this world is not a footnote, but a vital chapter still being written. Your presence in this world is not a footnote, but a vital chapter still being written. The quality of attention you bring, the patience you've cultivated, the forgiveness you've learned to offer. These are rare medicines in a hurried world. Rest well, not because your work is finished, but because tomorrow offers new opportunities to be gloriously, uncompromisingly yourself, the self it has taken decades to fully become. What freedom awaits in the morning light? With profound respect for the journey that has brought you here, Legends of the Fall team, thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. If Seraphina's journey moved your heart, if her courage, resilience, and the Duke's quiet devotion brought you comfort or inspiration, we invite you to support our channel in a meaningful way. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone you care about, and leave a comment telling us what this story meant to you. Your words truly encourage us. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. Your support, from the bottom of our hearts, keeps us motivated to continue bringing you more stories filled with love, redemption, and powerful emotional turns. At the end of this video, you'll find a suggestion for another unforgettable story from our channel. Click it and continue discovering more heartfelt journeys, just like this one. With all our gratitude, Legends of the Fall team, Lord Silas Huntington, after a brief, formal farewell to Countess Isolde, departed Everhart Manor the day after Gideon's initial visit. His internal monologue revealed a quiet resignation. He sensed Seraphina's disinterest and the Duke's strong, undeniable claim. He chose to withdraw gracefully, recognizing that some battles were not meant to be fought. He was a gentleman, after all, and Seraphina deserved a love that burned brighter than polite admiration. Isolde, however, barely registered his departure, already considering other, more pliable options for her stepdaughter. Inside her private sitting room, Countess Isolde, after Lord Silas's carriage had disappeared down the drive, was seen looking through a large, leather-bound book of eligible bachelors. She muttered to herself, her brow furrowed in a determined frown. Silas Huntington was too discerning, too fond of intellect. No, Seraphina requires someone more easily managed, someone who will not question her health or her finances. Her fingers traced a name in the book, a new, more malleable pawn in her ongoing game. Her schemes, far from ending, were merely intensifying. During her initial isolation at Everhart Manor, Seraphina had discovered a rarely used, forgotten library wing in the manor's neglected western reaches. It was filled with her late father's extensive collection of books on history, philosophy, and literature. She spent countless hours there, a quiet rebellion against her confinement, poring over ancient texts and engaging with the minds of centuries past. This hidden sanctuary became her university, cultivating the vast knowledge and independent thought that would later captivate Duke Gideon and distinguish her from the superficial ladies of society. After finding her mother's diary, Seraphina had returned to its hidden compartment. She read a longer entry, one that spoke of her mother's initial anxieties about Isolde's arrival and subtle, coded warnings about protecting Seraphina's inheritance. "The emeralds are not just jewels," the delicate script read, "but a key. Alaric fears for your future, my sweet girl. Look to his study, to the hidden compartment behind the portrait of the first Earl. There, important papers might be kept." The entry sent a shiver down Seraphina's spine, deepening the mystery surrounding her mother's past and foreshadowing a later, crucial discovery. Weeks before Duke Gideon's arrival, Lady Elara Blackwood had found herself increasingly dissatisfied with her mother's treatment of Seraphina. She had overheard Isolde, yet again, telling a visiting acquaintance that Seraphina was indisposed and unable to attend a small social gathering. Elara had sighed, a sound of profound frustration. "Always indisposed," she murmured to herself, staring out her window. "It's a charade, and Seraphina fades more each day. This cannot continue." A seed of rebellion, small but persistent, began to grow within her heart, setting the stage for her later, more direct confrontation. In his private study at the local inn, Duke Gideon Ravenscroft paced nervously. Outside, the pre-dawn quiet had been shattered by a violent thunderstorm, rain lashing against the windows, thunder rumbling ominously. Each flash of lightning illuminated his intense, anxious expression as he repeatedly checked his pocket watch. The storm mirrored the tempest in his soul, a fierce determination to protect Seraphina hardening with each passing moment. He knew the risks they were taking, but the thought of Seraphina falling into Isolde's clutches again was unbearable. He stood ready, a silent vigil against the night. As Duke Gideon's carriage sped away from Everhart Manor, Seraphina took one last look back. The ancient stone walls of her childhood home were partially obscured by the receding mist and the lingering tendrils of the storm. A mix of sadness for the past she was leaving behind and profound hope for the future washed over her. It was a bittersweet farewell to the gilded cage that had held her captive, a symbolic breaking of chains. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of release, as she turned her face towards the open road ahead. Seraphina leaned against Gideon, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over her, a calm after the storm that had raged both within and without. They shared a quiet moment, hands clasped, looking forward to the future that stretched before them, boundless and bright. This was not merely an escape, but the beginning of a life forged in courage, intellect, and an unwavering love. The road to London, once a path to uncertainty, now led to a shared destiny.